Oh, this is this is this is actually so dumb. Boys, we got catfished.
Yeah, baby. Yeah.
If I hear the words human wave assaults one more time, I give up immediately. Oh my god, what did he say? Which, no jokes, the media nicknamed the ghosts of Bakhmut. But the most important, he says how Bakhmut was the first time that trenches were used in the Ukraine war. The first time? The first time! My fear is that it was done to completely distort the true ratio of losses at this point of the battle. Would the Daily Mail really dare to do that? So I wonder who told this story far from the truth.
The second tactic was Wagner's human wave assaults.
Okay, I think we're done. We're done. My friends, a lot of you have been bombarding me to make part 2 of the Daily Mail's video on the Battle of Bakhmut. Yes, I know it's been a while, but I simply didn't have the willpower to go through this video again. So I guess this one is for you. For those that missed part 1, link will be in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe to the Daily Mail to support their efforts. And as a disclaimer, the Wagner PMC is a bad organization composed of very, very bad guys. This video only adds historical context. Without further ado, let's jump right in.
From this point on, it becomes a case of diminishing returns. Russian casualties remain high throughout, but that 5-to-1 ratio narrows considerably.
I already regret doing this video. The Russians lost 5 times more soldiers than the Ukrainians? What is the source? Trust me, bro. And why is the ratio of losses suddenly changing? Don't know. This is the type of documentary I love. They just tell you things you have to take for granted, and you're left with more questions than when you started.
Ukraine is also expending some of its best troops, whilst Russia is only losing mercenaries and conscripts.
Now you see the benefit of having covered the entire Battle of Bakhmut is that you can't bullshit me. For those that are new, once again, what Russian conscripts is he talking about? The people Wagner recruited all did so voluntarily. They're not conscripts. Same thing goes for the Russian VDV units positioned on the flanks. Those are manned by volunteers. However, I remember one side making heavy use of actual conscripts. Do you remember this clip of this Ukrainian soldier complaining about the lack of military training of newly mobilized personnel?
У нас є мужики, блядь, які були там кілька днів в піхоті, блядь. Кажуть, виходять, блядь, русські як на зайчика, блядь, і все.
Ну їх же кладуть чи ні?
Кладуть, звісно, блядь, но тим не менее вони виходять, блядь, більш підготовлені. Пацанов, блядь, по 3 дня привозять, нахуй. 3 дня, блядь, на Харків завезли, от були, блядь, 2 рожка вистріляли, нахуй, Бахмут, штурмове підрозділення. Та йоп, 3 дня, якого можна штурмовика зробити?
Может, вы тоже лишнего не говорите.
Та що лишнього?
Чугисы уже на статью вот опять набалакал.
Та мені похуй, ну я що.
Everyone around that soldier suddenly got scared and very worried about his statement because he told the truth. And of course, that was quickly edited out of the version that was published online. Or what about this interview? Where this Ukrainian journalist asked, is it true that an unprepared fighter stays alive in Bakhmut for 4 hours? And just look at the guy's reaction. No, 4 hours seems a bit low, it's more like 6 to 8. Or what about this segment? The Mobiks were tactically retreating and were stopped by an officer of the Ukrainian NKVD, which you can identify with his different uniform. Follows a heated argument. He tells them to go back. The Mobiks say it does not make sense from a military perspective to fight for this position. They say there are only 7 of them left. They just can't take it anymore. They're exhausted. They're freezing, suffering from frostbite. They haven't eaten for days. And then ask, where are all the other 500 men of our battalion to take that position instead of us? To which the NKVD officer replies, there's no one else. So who is actually using conscripts in Bakhmut? Wagner, formerly incarcerated. Ukraine, newly incarcerated.
By the end of February, Russian forces have advanced up to the Bakhmutka River inside Bakhmut itself.
I wish they would have explained in detail how the Russians achieved this from a tactical perspective, but only a bunch of nerds would even care. Remember when the UK's Defense Ministry reported in March 2023, Ukraine war, Russian reservists fighting with shovels. Unbeknown to them, a meme was born.
In the south, they have reached the Seversky Donetsk Canal and are now threatening to cut the road of life through Ivaniska.
The other road of life. This is so ridiculous. Even at the moment of recording, nobody was like, hold on, what am I even saying? As I stated in part 1, that was definitely not the road of life. This is one of the biggest mistakes in the video. Road of life clearly implies the last usable supply road. So it wasn't the one going through Ivanivsky, but this one going through Hromove. Other than this, yes, this is, generally speaking, what happened.
They are also approaching the only other road out of the city, near Hromove, in the north.
Actually, that's not entirely correct. Whenever the Russians win, fast forward, the Daily Mail brushed over a very important part of the battle which, surprise surprise, goes against their narrative. Why did they do this? Because it would have shown the operational and tactical abilities of the Wagner PMC.
2 pincers are now advancing around Bakhmut. If Russia can close them, it will mean the destruction of tens of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers inside.
But I thought the Russians had no strategy. How could this be possible? What about the meat-wave attacks that were just too effective? This part requires some additional context. Alright, let's jump back to 2023. That was the situation north of Bakhmut at the beginning of January 2023. Russian forces had pushed out of Solidar, crossed the Bakhmutka River, and stormed Blahodatne. This allowed them to outflank Ukrainian positions from the north. From there, they rolled back the Ukrainian army in this sector. By the 10th of February, Wagnerian forces had the Ukrainians caught in a cauldron around Krasnaora and Paraskovivka. This maneuver forced entire Ukrainian units to abandon their positions. By the 17th, the Russians had captured a 5-kilometer portion of the M3 highway north of Bakhmut. Something super important that was not even mentioned in the video by the Daily Mail. On the 18th, Wagner broke through west of Yahidne. By the end of February, Russian forces advanced another 5 kilometers and started pushing inside Bakhmut proper. As you can see, the Ukrainian garrison was about to be fully encircled, and all this forced the Ukrainians to abandon the east bank of the city. Anyway, I find it very disappointing that from a historical and storytelling perspective, that the Daily Mail didn't properly explain the battles that led to the fall of all the positions north of Bakhmut.
Despite this, friction begins to develop between the Russian military and Wagner over who exactly is responsible for these successes. Prigozhin begins to complain that the Russian MOD is limiting his supplies of ammunition, causing high casualties.
I don't remember the beef between Shoigu and Prigozhin to be about that issue at all. The beef was that Shoigu and the Russian Ministry of Defense wanted to halt offensive operations in Bakhmut in order to focus and prepare on blocking Ukraine's upcoming spring offensive. Meanwhile, Prigozhin wanted to continue in Bakhmut at all costs, since he felt he was so close to bring a much-needed victory for Russia. And honestly, the problem was that, somewhat, they were both right.
Seeing these pincers closing, Ukrainian military intelligence privately warned Zelensky that the situation in the city is catastrophic. But rather than withdraw, Ukraine doubles down, deploying its feared Kraken special forces to keep the road of life open.
I don't recall the Kraken regiment playing such an important role in the Battle of Bakhmut. I just went through my notes again, and never have I mentioned the Kraken regiment throughout the entire duration of the battle. I mean, on the Daily Mail's own map of the battle from March 2023, the Kraken regiment is not even mentioned. Okay, I just checked. It's because this information comes from leaked documents that were only released after the battle. I mean, I guess. Anyway, I think it's interesting. That could explain why nobody mentioned the actions of the Kraken regiment during this Battle of Bakhmut. Even on the YouTube channel of the Kraken regiment, they have barely any footage from the Battle of Bakhmut. All the videos either happened before or after the battle. Anyway, as you can see in this video, even high-ranking Ukrainian commanders said there was no point in holding on to Bakhmut. especially with the very suitable defensive positions in Chasiv Yar, only a couple kilometers behind. Ukraine deciding to double down in Bakhmut reminds me of this very famous formula.
See, as you can see, the more you around, the more you're going to find out.
The big picture, what's important to remember, is that during this time, elite Ukrainian units were actually pulled out of the urban area of Bakhmut to be increasingly replaced by Mobiks and territorial defense units.
Bitter trench battles now break out in the north and south as both sides fight to the death over mere feet of ground. Despite high casualties, the Ukrainians succeed in slowing and then stopping the Russian advance.
Oh my god, what did he say? High Ukrainian casualties?
Despite high casualties, the Ukrainians...
Watch out, bro, watch out, bro. Slippery slope. Never forget the 5-to-1 ratio. Jokes aside, in this case, there was indeed very intense fighting around this hilltop where the road of life bends to the west. For weeks, Russians and Ukrainians fought extremely hard over control of this hill, with the Russians inching their way towards that road, followed by massive artillery shelling. Just take a look at this map. Can you see all the shell craters focused on that one spot? All the trench lines converging to that area. You can imagine the intensity of the fighting that took place there over control of the road of life. I wish the Daily Mail focused a little bit more on this very important part of the battle. Just like I said in part 1, once again, the design of the map is very sleek, it's very aesthetic. But it lacks the elevation of terrain and all the forests that are now very important in the story. As you can see here, west of Bakhmut, there was some elevated terrain with lots of woods. And this is where that road of life was passing through. It's important because the Russian battle plan was to get really high and capture the ridgelines which overlooked the entire city.
This drives Prigozhin wild. The mercenary leader was hoping to earn easy brownie points with Putin by taking Bakhmut. But he is now months behind schedule and watching his beloved Wagner group, the source of his power, get butchered.
Why are they depicting Prigozhin like a child, like a madman? At this point, I'm wondering if the Daily Mail will even mention the fact that he went to the front right on the contact line for all his PR stunts. Something that no other commander in the Ukraine war has ever done.
Though the Ukrainians have succeeded in stopping Russia's encirclement, Wagner troops are now camped out dangerously close to the only two roads out of the city. Both are well within artillery range.
This is not the Napoleonic Wars, okay? I don't want to repeat myself, but like I said in part 1, they should have used the word fire control. And to be honest, this road west of Ivanivsky was unusable because this bridge was destroyed. So the only road coming from the west that could really reach Bakhmut was this one going through Hromove, and hence the term Road of Life. It was also a large paved road which facilitated the back and forth of all the vehicles. Apart from the Road of Life, there were a multitude of smaller country roads and dirt paths that could be used by the AFU, until the mud season struck.
And this complicates getting supplies into the city and casualties back out again, as convoys have to dodge explosions the whole way.
Pause, I can't believe it. That video they showed was definitely not geolocated there. This is a big mistake. You can clearly see that the high-rise buildings here are part of the Bakhmut citadel, and there are no such buildings in Ivanivsky. So I went digging into my old Bakhmut archives, and after spending way too much time on this, I'm definitely on the spectrum, but I found another video that was recorded at the exact same spot. But just like on the hub, it's the full version with better definition. As you can see, it's the same pontoon bridge as in the Daily Mail's video. Only thing, this is not geolocated in Ivanivsky, but surprise surprise, in Hromove. The line should point right here. If we use satellite imagery, that was a small river and the bridge over it that was replaced by pontoon crossing. We see a long road going straight with some terrain elevation and high-rise buildings on the horizon. Boys, this is our spot, not Ivanivsky. All this mess because some intern wrote that the road going through Ivanivsky was the Road of Life. No! And the funniest thing is that when the entire Daily Mail's team gathered to review the video, not one person noticed that mistake.
At this point, Ukrainian generals know they cannot hold on forever, but they'll be damned if they're going down without a fight.
Was this documentary financed by Michael Bay? Bleh, this is what I want from American war movie, not from my commanders.
In early April, they give up their defenses on the Bakhmut River and retreat to the west.
Oh yeah, they just give it up. They're generous, they just gave up their positions. Bakhmut was only taken because the Ukrainians willingly retreated. Here, brada, take it and go. Okay, you mean they got outmaneuvered and defeated by mere PMC. Also, the Daily Mail didn't show Prigozhin's photo op when he took pictures next to the T-34 monument on the east bank of Bakhmut in early March.
Prigozhin films himself raising the Russian flag over Bakhmut town hall and claims the city has been captured. But this is far from the truth.
Shameful display!
They're really trying so hard to portray him as a lunatic. Context. Prigozhin said that because his men had taken control of the administration building at the center of the city, that Bakhmut was now legally theirs and captured. He said that on purpose to troll, just like so many of his other statements. Prigozhin even talks about how his men will carry this same banner on the western side of Bakhmut, which, surprise surprise, he says is still held by Ukrainian troops. So I wonder who told this story far from the truth.
Ukraine is making an historic last stand, defending an area of just 20 city blocks on the far western edge of the city.
Wait, hold on. Why did our friend start removing the blue tokens? Let's go back, maybe I didn't see properly. Okay, in this frame there are 13 tokens, and now there are only 6. I actually don't understand why he would do that. My fear is that it was done to completely distort the true ratio of losses at this point of the battle. Would the Daily Mail really dare to do that?
Yeah, baby! Yeah.
Their objective is now to hold up Russian forces in this area for as long as possible, while elsewhere, Kiev prepares for its 2023 counteroffensive.
So, yes, that's actually true. But we can very well say the same thing the other way around. How many Ukrainian forces were wasted just to hold a couple city blocks in Bakhmut that clearly everyone knew would be lost eventually?
Despite punishing conditions and near constant attacks from the Russians, the Ukrainians defy all the odds and hold this tiny piece of territory for 6 weeks.
What makes me laugh is the language used in this video. Despite punishing conditions, a historic last stand, defy all the odds. The Russians advance like cowards and the Ukrainians retreat like heroes. All this against former prison inmates with barely any military training, wielding shovels, and now with barely any artillery support. In front of them, Ukrainian elite special forces. I actually wonder who had the odds stacked against them. I mean, this is what they said in the video. Oh, my bad, yes, my bad. I forgot about the human waves. The human waves.
This proves to be the straw that breaks Prigozhin's back and his mind.
Oh, I don't even know what to comment to this.
Throughout April and May, as the fighting rages, he takes to Telegram multiple times to rail against Sergei Shoigu and Valery Gerasimov, who he brands fat cats, cowards, and traitors. This is dangerous. Both Shoigu and Gerasimov are close allies of Putin. They have the army at their back, but Prigozhin seems not to care. He accuses them of a grand conspiracy in which they are deliberately withholding ammo from his troops in order to get them killed.
It's not really a conspiracy when what Prigozhin said was not wrong. It's now almost certain that the Russian Ministry of Defense indeed withheld ammunition from Wagner. And earlier in February, the MOD banned Wagner from continuing its recruitment campaign in prisons. From a military perspective, withholding ammunition wasn't necessarily meant to eliminate Wagner, but to physically block them and force them to stop the Battle of Bakhmut that was draining too many resources. The Russian Army Command wanted to stock up on artillery shells to counter the upcoming spring offensive, which was now imminent. From the High Command's perspective, what was the point in winning in Bakhmut if all the other sectors collapsed? All these actions were done to force Prigozhin back in line.
On May 20th, the last of Ukraine's troops withdraw from the city. Their supplies have almost totally run out, and if they stay any longer, they risk being surrounded and wiped out.
That's it. No, that's all they're going to say about the Battle of Bakhmut. The video is not even done. What can they possibly say from now on? No mention of how the musicians outmaneuvered the enemy and transferred their troops to flank these Ukrainian strongholds from the north. No videos or pictures of all the house-to-house fighting either. Because trenches. Whoops, spoilers, I'm getting ahead of myself. No mention of how FAB bombs were first used against Bakhmut and with great effectiveness, as they destroyed entire city blocks, thus allowing Wagner's infantry to advance. No mention of the large-scale counterattacks launched by the 3rd Assault Brigade Azov in early May along the Road of Life, but also around Ivanivsky and along the Seversky Donetsk Canal. This is clearly an incomplete account of the Battle of Bakhmut. My theory is the following. The Daily Mail chained an intern in the basement and told him he has 24 hours to write a script on the Battle of Bakhmut, or else it's back to writing about Meghan Markle.
Russia's troops now occupy Bakhmut. But in the outskirts, Ukrainian commandos and snipers remain to make their lives as difficult as possible.
Oh no! I can't believe what I just heard. Snipers and commandos? Really? This is actually so bad. There's no way this is not a parody. And the worst is that even with their pro-Ukraine bias, instead of talking about the Azov counterattacks that rolled back Russian gains, actual things we can see on the map, they prefer to talk about these anecdotal stories of snipers, which, no jokes, the media nicknamed the ghosts of Bakhmut. I'm convinced that the intern that worked on this documentary used Enemy at the Gates for his inspiration. There's no other way to explain this entire mess.
Prigozhin has no intention of his remaining men becoming targets for these sharpshooters. In just a few days, Wagner completely withdraws, leaving just the Russian army and the proxy republics behind.
Et voila, this is purely for show, as a way to continue their narrative, because in reality, the front line didn't look like this. Let's play a game of Find the Differences. On the left is how the Daily Mail depicted the front line around Bakhmut in May 2023, and on the right, the true situation around the city at the same moment.
But rather than head back to base, Prigozhin masses what is left of his mercenaries and heads for Moscow instead.
Wait, what? We're already done? Now understand how girls must feel like. Isn't this video about the Battle of Bakhmut? We're 14 minutes in and the main story about the battle is over. What was the point of skipping through the battles of Solidar, the pocket of Krasnaora Paraskovivka, the breakthrough in Yahidne, the urban battle inside Bakhmut, Azov's counterattacks? So many important parts of the battle were just never mentioned. All this so the Daily Mail could speak about Prigozhin's rebellion. It seems Bakhmut was actually the subplot. It was the introduction. Boys, we got catfished. Anyway, back to the story. They didn't leave for Moscow right away. Wagner left Bakhmut in late May, early June, leaving only Bieber and Dolik behind. And only 3 weeks later did the mutiny take place.
Prigozhin's rebellion begins here, in Rostov-on-Don, the command center for all of Russia's operations in Ukraine. He quickly seizes control and films himself ranting at the base commanders about the ineffectiveness of the Russian military. But he doesn't stop there. Next, he assembles a column of thousands of troops, tanks, and armored vehicles.
I should have turned off my brain before watching this. Remember what I said in 2023. Prigozhin claimed that his 25,000 men were involved in this march on Moscow. However, people on the ground say 150 pieces of equipment. Others said 400 pieces in 4 separate columns. Or perhaps it was the same column spotted 4 times. In my opinion, it was closer to 150 vehicles, which according to my estimates would mean 1,500 Wagnerians involved in this operation, plus maybe a couple hundreds in Rostov. meaning that over 20,000 musicians of the orchestra did not participate in this armed protest. Yet on Wikipedia they stated 8,000 men. Let's just check out the source. Lower estimate per the Daily Telegraph, citing anonymous sources from UK security services.
Yeah, baby. Yeah.
And the upper estimate by Prigozhin himself, who had every incentive to lie to hype up his rebellion. You see, most of these Wagnerian vehicles were just trucks, MRAPs, but also buses and pickup trucks. Nothing fancy. Overall, a very light formation. With that being said, Wagner's mutiny had its fair share of memes. Like this girl taking graduation pictures with this Wagnerian T90S in the background. Or how everyone in town went to take pictures with the rebels. And as you can see for the Riz, the rebels painted red Z's on their vehicles.
The column quickly heads north, up the M4 highway towards Moscow. Branding this a march for justice, he says his plan is to take over the Russian MOD and kick out Shoigu and Gerasimov. But Putin is having none of it. He denounces the march as a coup, calls Wagner traitors, and vows revenge.
Putin had no other choice, really. To keep his figure of authority, he had to crush this rebellion with an iron fist.
For the next few hours, chaos reigns. The Russian army gets into a shooting match with Wagner around Voronezh, but apparently cannot stop the march.
Strike 1, Wagner actually bypassed Russian security forces in Voronezh via the Lipetsk Oblast. Strike 2, I don't think there were any firefights, really. It was mostly aircrafts that were shot down by Wagner's air defense. Allegedly, up to 6 helicopters were shot down, as well as one Il-22M airborne command center plane.
But then, with Wagner closing in on Moscow, Prigozhin suddenly calls off the march and heads home. Why exactly he does this remains a mystery.
A what? A mystery? This is the sort of answer I expect from the History Channel when talking about aliens. Wagner's columns were physically stopped south of the Oka River. Russian security forces removed all the bridges and reinforced the crossing points. There's no way Wagnerian forces could have passed these roadblocks without massive casualties on both sides. Prigozhin must have also seen how the local population actually fully supported the president by establishing their own roadblocks to stop Wagner.
Prigozhin says he did it to prevent bloodshed, but that hardly seems credible.
What? How is that not credible? What is it then? Please enlighten us.
Belarus dictator Alexander Lukashenko takes credit for brokering a peace, though that doesn't seem very likely either.
As a reminder, Wagner did relocate to Belarus right after the mutiny, but Lukashenko brokering an agreement, not credible. Source, UK's Ministry of Defense.
Whatever the truth, Putin survived, and Wagner was broken up shortly after, its remaining fighters absorbed into the regular military or exiled to Africa.
Whoa, congrats! Finally, a statement that is factual and without any mistakes. Well, this is also what boosted the Russian army's offensive capabilities in the summer of 2023. Instead of having all these assault detachments regrouped in one battle corps, the Ministry of Defense spread them out. That way, every Russian brigade had its own assault Sturm detachment. And in certain sectors in the Zaporozhye front, former Wagnerian and prison inmates were also used as decoy to hold false positions, in order to set up traps against the advancing Ukrainian columns.
Prigozhin's fate was sealed in late August, when his plane exploded, taking off from Moscow with the Wagner leader and all his senior lieutenants on board.
And this is not true. Most of his lieutenants are actually still alive. One of them even resurfaced recently, like Commander Zombie, the mastermind behind Operation Pipeline in Kursk.
There is little doubt about who was ultimately responsible.
The one we shall not name. Is it me, or this entire segment about Prigozhin's rebellion was really not necessary? First, because they butchered the facts, but also because it took away precious time from actual events that happened in Bakhmut.
Now let's clear the board and discuss the tactics that turned Bakhmut into one of the bloodiest battles of the 21st century.
I swear, if I hear the words human wave assaults one more time, I quit. I give up immediately. Let's go.
First, trench warfare. Before the Battle of Bakhmut began properly, Ukrainian defenders had watched Russia take Severodonetsk and Lysychansk using huge artillery barrages. They fired shells at the cities until there was nothing left to defend, then advanced into the ruins and took them over.
It doesn't even make sense. This is the last straw that is going to break my mind. The footage doesn't even match what they're saying. The buildings are clearly still standing and they would make excellent defensive positions. Okay, I agree, maybe I'm nitpicking. But the most important, he says how Bakhmut was the first time that trenches were used in the Ukraine war. C'est grave. The first time? The first time! Who's gonna tell them that trenches already covered the Donbass landscape starting in 2014? Even then, in May 2022, months before the start of the Battle of Bakhmut, I released a video titled Trench Warfare is Back.
To stop them from doing the same thing in Bakhmut, the Ukrainians dug trench networks. Trenches are effective against artillery because shells mostly kill people with shrapnel, white-hot fragments of metal thrown in all directions when they explode. Trenches protect against this by shielding soldiers from these flying fragments. Trenches also protect against infantry assaults. Attackers are almost completely exposed whilst charging at the trench, whilst defenders are almost completely protected until the last moment.
Okay, bro, maybe in 1916, but not right now in Ukraine. We have plenty of footage of how trench assaults are actually carried out in the Ukraine war. First, artillery preparation. As the defenders are pinned down, armored vehicles quickly drive along open fields, along paths that have been demined, and disembark the riflemen right into the tree lines, right on top of the trenches. The vehicles then use their firepower to provide direct fire support for the attacking soldiers, while the infantry mops up one dugout after another. These assaults actually go extremely fast, and if done properly, the defender might actually lose more troops than the attacking force. Honestly, maybe I should do a video on the tactics of the Ukraine war, because this is actually ridiculous.
The second tactic was Wagner's human wave assaults.
Okay, I think we're done. We're done.
1 hour later.
How can this be a tactic when there's not a single footage of Russian soldiers using human wave attacks? None. Zero. Out of all the GoPros and drones flying around. Zero evidence. It's as if you have a friend that claims he's traveled all around the world, visited every country on earth, but he can't show you a single picture of him abroad. And when you ask him about it, he starts getting nervous. Oh, you don't trust me, bro? I thought you were my friend. Oh, but I actually never posted the pictures. Whoops, I lost the hard drive. Oh, they were on my USB key, I lost it.
The mercenaries used this tactic for two reasons. First, the trenches.
First reason, the trenches? What is that supposed to mean?
And second, the composition of Wagner's forces. Throughout the battle, Wagner had a ready supply of prison conscripts with barely enough training to operate a rifle, and a small but very elite group of mercenary soldiers.
Like I told you earlier, in February 2023, Wagner was banned from recruiting in prisons. So no, Wagner didn't have a ready supply of prison inmates. Now he does bring up a good point. How was Wagner so efficient despite the majority of its fighters having so little training? Let's see if he's going to elaborate on that, or if we're going to go full circle with the entire
Wagner's human wave assaults. The last thing Yevgeny Prigozhin wanted to do was waste his valuable mercenaries in frontal assaults on the Ukrainian trenches. So, he developed a tactic of sending in the prisoners as cannon fodder. Their job was simply to advance towards the Ukrainians until they got shot at.
Sorry, what? Absorb the bullets? I'm actually in shock right now. I'm speechless. Bro, this is not Age of Empires.
This almost always resulted in the prisoners getting killed, but none of that mattered to Prigozhin.
So why did you say Prigozhin lost his mind when his Wagnerians were getting butchered? Make it make sense.
What mattered was that, while shooting at the prisoners, the Ukrainians would be forced to reveal their positions. Once Wagner knew where the Ukrainians were, artillery would be called down on top of them, and elite mercenaries dispatched on flanking attacks to take them out.
Oh, this is this is actually so dumb. The front is continuous. You cannot just outflank positions like that easily. The intern should have stuck with covering Meghan Markle. Allow me to explain. Long story short, Wagner used its veterans and elite forces to recon and storm enemy positions. Once the trench bastion was captured, they would pull out and be replaced with the prison inmate detachments to hold the trench lines. Yes, for them to take the brunt of Ukrainian artillery and drone strikes. They would also use their shovels to improve the field works they were in and build communication trenches for the second wave. Because anyone can do that, you don't need any military training. This means, more often than not, prison inmates fell while defending the trenches and not while attacking them. It's literally basic logic. In other words, The Witcher is more historically accurate than this entire video.
Fuck.
According to Prigozhin's own figures, 20,000 Wagner men died in the battle, an estimated 17,000 of whom were conscript.
It's interesting because only about 11,000 inmates were reported as KIA by Mediazona over the course of the battle, and about 1,700 Wagnerian veterans, meaning 1 veteran for 6 inmates. So statistically speaking, Wagner veterans suffered higher casualties than their share of the PMC's force. Overall, we're talking about a total of roughly 13,000 fatalities, compared to Prigozhin's 20,000 figure. The difference is 50%, it's huge.
But it also proved effective in its own brutal way. Wagner avoided wasting precious artillery shells.
Look, I don't know what you think, guys, but I think soldiers are more precious than artillery rounds.
Ukraine, meanwhile, chewed through some of its best troops and most valuable ammunition, trying and ultimately failing to hold these attacks back.
Well, Chris, slow down, you're entering dangerous territory. And we know Ukraine also sacrificed a lot of mobilized personnel to hold Bakhmut.
They point out that, before Bakhmut, Ukraine was losing roughly 1 city per week to the advancing Russians. But this city held out for 11 months.
Yes, but it misses the point. It misses the big picture. First of all, Bakhmut is not the only settlement to have fallen to the Russians during this campaign, and apart from Wagnerian troops. The Russian armed forces lost very little manpower between October 2022 and May 2023, meaning all their units were fully manned and fresh to counter the Ukrainian summer offensive. Meaning for 8 months, Ukraine focused all its energy on Bakhmut, instead of attacking the weakened Russian positions. It was a major strategic mistake. In other words, Bakhmut was a brilliant diversion for Russia that allowed them to regain some much needed strength.
Critics say that politics got in the way of tactics, and an earlier withdrawal could have conserved much-needed forces for later offensive.
Absolutely, politics did get in the way. So many Ukraine commanders said there was no more point in holding Bakhmut, but Zelensky insisted in defending it at all costs. Rings a bell, just like in Kursk.
It also tied down some of Ukraine's best formations, so that, when their summer counteroffensive began just a few weeks later, it was new and inexperienced units leading the charge.
And yes, many Ukrainian units lost their veterans, only to be replaced by mobilized personnel.
Whichever side you agree with, there is little doubt that Bakhmut deserves to be remembered as one of the bloodiest battles of the 21st century.
Okay, it was very difficult for me to go through all this, but I think it's finally mission accomplished. That's all I have for you today. Let me know in the comment section what you thought of my analysis. If you're new to the channel, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to support my work, make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal. The links are in the description below.